Hi, friends.
Hello.
Hello, hello.
This is a really exciting conversation to me because it was funny. I was asking myself the other day, like, what are my areas of expertise? What do I really know a lot about? And kind of what are my natural gifts? And one of the things I have realized about myself is that I'm really good at managing big changes. Like I have a bit of a gift for that.
Hmm.
And I've been through a lot of big changes in my life. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized how much all of us experience countless big changes and identity shifts in the course of our lives. And in conversations with you all, there have been some big moments where we've gotten to really look at the how and the why and what gets in the way when it comes to not just taking the courageous leaps into change, but the day to day activity of what it takes to embrace and embody change. And so I knew I wanted to have a conversation about releasing old identities. And I knew from the second I had that thought that I wanted Kara and Joanne to help guide us through that conversation because with each of you, I have had the incredible privilege of being beside you and with you in the course of some major identity shifts. And I've gotten to witness firsthand what has been, or secondhand, I don't know, what has been hard and hopeful and the ways this continues to unfold, right? And then this so much is not about like, oh, I'm going to make the change. Done. Ta-da. All set, locked and loaded. It is a continuous evolution and process of actively creating the change within the context of our lives. So I think that's really what we're going to get into today. But before we do, I thought it might be interesting to not start with the changes you've made, but rather start with where you are now. So, Kara, let's start with you. What are you doing now in your life?
Yeah, well, right now it was funny, I was just at a dinner the other day and someone said like, "Oh, what do you do? You're a writer, right? What do you write?" And I was like, "That's a great, let me think about that. What do I do?" And so I could sort of boil it down to, I write musicals, plays, and books. I wrote a motivational journal that came out last almost a year ago, to this very week. And yeah, and in the midst of just tackling new projects left and right. So I would identify uh, with calling myself a writer, which is funny because the topic um, of this talk got me thinking about old identities and how I did not identify as a writer as much as, 6, 7 years ago. Um, and so, yeah, that's sort of what I'm leaning into at the moment and just calling myself that and believing it, I guess.
I love that word believing it. And I want to talk about that some more in a second about the difference between saying we're something and really believing we're something. It's like there's some really interesting research around the difference between doing something and identifying as something. So saying I write tends to have a much lower impact on our sense of belief than saying I am a writer.
Hmm.
And just that subtle shift between I do the thing or I am the thing seems to have, in some clinical studies, a pretty substantive effect on our ability to believe in our capabilities. Joanne, my love, what are you doing these days?
Hello, hello. So it's interesting you say that
What are you
about
being
like
these days? That's really what I should
I
ask.
know, I know. It's like I am, I do. I think from the beginning of when we started working together, I would say like, I do instead of I am, like, because technically it's like you're already doing it. So it is I am, right? Even though it may not necessarily be acknowledged as a title, like wherever you work or, in your like day to day. So what am I? So I am a regional office operations manager. That is what I am. And it's actually literally everything that I do. And so it's a very exciting job. It's new for me. It's definitely something that I have been doing actually before I got this job, but I just didn't know what it actually was, right? So now I can name it and say, I am this.
I love that. Now let's talk about where you were before, because you have not always been a regional operations manager.
Mm-hmm.
What are some of the
So
identities you've held in the past?
yeah, so um I work in finance. So currently I work for a registered investment advisor, which is like one little portion of like the larger firms. Prior to this, I was an executive assistant for very senior individuals. So I always identified as like, assisting, right? Instead of actually owning. So I think that that is something that, like I always identified, like, how can I help? And so I have shifted my vocabulary to say, well, I have this idea and I can actually create this and own it and run and execute on this.
I love that you brought that up, and that's really where our work began. But you've had some other like major identity shifts before
Yes.
that too.
So before that, I was an opera singer. I mean, once a singer, always a singer. So Kara, when you were like, I write plays, I was like, yes, 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 creative. Um, so I was an opera singer, for a decade plus, and interesting. I'm actually able to say that I was very successful at this career because of the work Aranzas and I have done. Like, you just kind of like go back and you're like, I think being a type and a musician and all these things, like sometimes you're just really hard on yourself. It's like, well, I didn't do XYZ, what is the industry standard? So I must not have had a successful. No, I made great money and I sang very well and I had amazing shows and it was great. It may not have been what my goals were or what I thought the goal needed to be as an opera singer, right? Like, I want to be a principal artist. I want to sing at the Metropolitan Opera in New York City. That's not the only opera company in the world, number one opera company in the world. So it's one of them, right? And so I have sung with Metropolitan Opera singers, right? So to me, I'm on the same level, right? So that to me is success. So yeah.
I think there's something interesting for us to talk about too, like in this idea of success in the rearview mirror. And when we're looking at those old identities, how our perception of those has shifted over the course of our lives. So I want to come back to that a little bit. What are some of the old identities that you have held, Kara?
Yeah, I was an editor. I basically sort of got on the journalist editor track like right after moving to New York. I feel like college and before, like those identities, who knows what those were, but like if as far as career identities, um, yeah, I would identify as a journalist, like in New York media world. Which is very sort of hierarchical. So you could sort of say, I'm an editorial assistant, assistant editor, features editor, senior editor, editor in chief, like, and on and on. And yeah, I think that, and that's also what I did, and now it's occasionally what I do, but definitely like not how I would identify myself. Although with some lapses sometimes, it's a much easier sort of catch-all, right? So I think that's one thing about these identities. They can sort of persist even long after you sort of make a shift. It's much easier to say like, oh, well, I was an editor at Newsweek and the Daily Beast, and I did work with X, Y, and Z, as opposed to like I'm in this new chapter. So yeah, that was sort of my primary um, old identity.
So then I mean, I love what you just said there too about like the storytelling around it. And I was this, now I'm this. But then you said the old one persists. What do you mean by that?
I think, you know, our culture sort of trained us to think about identities as, how do I make money, And so if I make money as an editor, surely that's like my primary identity, right? And so I could sort of say I was an editor and I want to write screenplays or I want to write plays, and then sort of take a step back from, being an editor, but I'm still that identity just can sort of persist because I think it's easy. I mean, it's so much easier to sort of like drop nouns, into conversations. And I think that's mainly um, when you're talking to other people and like how you sort of present yourself to the world. We all sort of, at least in certain phases of our life, like try to I don't know, massage that identity to something that is like easily accessible for other people.
Hmm.
So, if I was at a party or something, it would be much easier to say, like, I'm a culture editor than, well, I want to do this and I want to do this, and maybe I'll write songs, but I haven't done that yet, and I haven't gotten paid for it, and things are in the works, and like you just kind of go for the noun and the verb. Yeah, that's kind of and it persists for a long time. I think it's 10 years later, I'm still like, well, kind of still a journalist. So it's a work in progress, I think.
It's interesting what you're saying about the money. And this is something you and I have talked about before, but the word that comes to mind for me as you were talking is that there is a need to legitimize what we're doing. Like we need to be able to say, oh, well, see, here's evidence that I did it. And sometimes the
Mhm.
evidence is they're paying me. And sometimes the evidence is I did the thing. But like just saying I am the thing feels like it's not enough sometimes. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would say that's completely right. I mean, I think the reason why I didn't sort of identify as a writer is, um, I didn't have that many, bylines somewhere, or I didn't have a play that was up, or I didn't have a book deal, or whatever. And I think that you're right. It's the legitimacy that it's not only when you're telling it to other people, but when you're also telling it to yourself. When you wake up on a Tuesday and you're just like, oh, what am I going to work on today? I think it's your first thought can sort of be like, well, what do other people need from me? What is the where am I most valuable? And usually that falls to like who's paying me to do something. And so I think that's why finding a new identity is so tricky. You can it's always evolving.
Well, I find too that the things I'm paying for, even if they're not the things I really want to move in the direction, or paying for, being paid for, even if they're not the thing I want to move in the direction of, like let's say in your case, you're being paid to be a journalist, what you want to be as a writer, what you're seeing yourself as a writer, the thing that takes the energy and the attention is the journalism.
Yeah, that's exactly
You've already
you
like
and
proven
I.
yourself. You have all this legitimacy there. Everybody believes it. You believe it. You have all the contacts.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And it's you're right too. There's the history there. Whereas if you don't have a demonstrated history in whatever the new thing that you're trying to do, it's sort of, I don't know, it's sort of like a line on a resume that doesn't quite like it's one bullet point, but like the other sort of identities have like 15 or 20. And so it takes a while to build up that like arsenal of things you can look back on and say, well, I guess I can say that that I write musicals because I did this show and this show and this show and I wrote this song. And but it's definitely, it reminds me of what you said in the beginning, that it's not an overnight process. This is like, you can't just make the change and call yourself the new thing. It's you're constantly proving that new identity, I think, to yourself over and over again.
Yeah, and I think it happens through your actions. And I want to come back to Joanne for a second because there was a time when Joanne made this career shift and she went from this sort of assisting, helping mindset, and she knew she was ready to be in the owner mindset, the leader mindset. And yet, all this other stuff, like you with journalism, Kara, you were both really good at that stuff. You had proven to yourselves you were really good at assisting and journalisting. I didn't, it's a many word. I
I
don't
like
think
that.
it's take off. You can put that in your next play. You're really good at journalisting and assisting. Like everybody had evidence, everybody had a ton of belief. And it's comfortable to go to those places where we know we're good. And we know like we've gotten lots of validation. People have paid us for it. But I think it's much scarier to live into the dreams that we know we're ready for. And whether it's professional or personal or whatever, it's all still true. And so, can you talk a little about what that journey was like for you, Joanne?
Yeah, I think that, as an executive assistant, there are many different levels in like the support, like, field, right? Junior admin, administrative assistant, executive assistant. The levels are like, they're like key level things, right? And so the fact that I was able to get into the field starting at a high level, like working for a partner at a major firm on Wall Street,
Yeah,
was
do you
like a
drop
big
the name
deal.
of which firm this is?
I mean, I don't know. Is this like a
Okay.
thing? I don't know. Should I don't want to. That's why I was like
It's
Wall
okay.
Street.
Everybody would be great. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah.
We'll just leave it at that.
So like to be at that level and to have that level of professionalism, right? There's so many different levels that, you kind of have to, meet, and decorum and confidentiality and all the things. And,
I
you know,
bring up the company, by the way, because it just
Mhm.
shows what a badass you must have been out of the gate at this stuff, right? Like, and I think, like with Kara's story, it was like there was a natural gift there.
Yeah,
It wasn't
yeah,
just passion and interest. You both had a gift and made you
yeah.
really good at that stuff from the beginning.
hmm Yeah, I agree. I agree. And I think that as the role evolved, as the individual got more and more senior, the needs got greater, right? And so I realized that I wasn't just doing the like executive assistant, I was doing a lot of chief of staff work. And so that kind of leads you more into, okay, I can give you this because it's not just you calendaring, you actually know what we do, why we do it, and the timing of how things progress in this business that we work in. And so I think that that knowledge is what helped me to understand, okay, first of all, you're 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 doing work of people that first of all could get, you need to be getting paid a lot more money. It's a lot more work. And so holding these two together, meshing them together, being able to really always searching for what we do, always searching for that knowledge, helped me to understand after a while that, wait a minute, I'm actually doing this. I'm not aiming to be a chief of staff. I am a chief of staff, period. So I think that it was a very slow transition because kind of like what you were saying, Kara, about identifying yourself, right? Like you're like, well, there's certain things that you're like, I identify. If I don't do these 3 bullet points, that people outside will recognize, well, what do you do? Like, oh, I work for such and such network, like, and they're like, oh yeah, she's a journalist, but if you don't work for somebody that, that it's like, no, you are that, right? And so I think when I was transitioning out of that, it was a little bit difficult because I was still in this subservient mindset of, can I help? Again, it's like, can I assist in this, that, and the other, instead of like, no, I actually did that work. So I can create this and I can own it. I can come up with strategy, all of these things, right? That is way beyond support work. So it wasn't an easy transition at all. Like, it took a lot to really believe it, start speaking on it and about it. And then I think, the senior leader was like, oh no, she's leaving. Like, I'm gonna lose her, like. And so, because this firm, I mean, it's
It was
obviously
because of your
prestigious and
self-advocacy too, though, right? Like that's really what that was a signal.
absolutely,
Like,
absolutely.
actually, I think I'm done with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And my drive for like wanting, like, not necessarily like change all the time, but I'm always a student, if you will, always wanting to learn, always wanting to continue to grow. So that stagnant, like, I just want to clock in, clock out executive assistant, like that was never me. Like, I'm always speaking to individuals in the business, speaking to other individuals and networking. And I mean, that came from music, right? Like, you network, like you just kind of like, you come in, you get gigs talking to people. It's like, oh, I know my friend is a billionaire and he owns such and such in Switzerland. Well, let me sing at his apartment for 10,000 euros for an hour. Sure. Like, no problem. You know what I mean? Like, but if you don't speak up, right, those things won't come to you. So yeah, I mean, I've always had very, very, I think because of just how I process things, I've always had good relationships with my managers, very upfront conversations to say, I've gotten to this point, I'd love to do X, I know you can, right? Will you create these opportunities for,
Well, and I
so.
think that initial act of, so what I'm hearing sort of is the process of realization, like I'm ready for something else. Something else is exciting and interesting to me. And then starting to sort of step into that new identity and feeling like, okay, I know I know some of the things around here. I can bring some of the gifts that I have collected and honed over the course of just my natural talents, but also other experience, and there's a part of this that I feel really ready and able to do. And then there's the mysterious stuff, right? The stuff that like starts to send us the like, you're a fraud. You don't know what you're doing. You don't have what it takes messages.
Yeah.
And I'll
Yeah.
say with Kara, there was a really awesome moment that always stands out to me where Kara was applying for all these different things and she applied for this really, really cool program that all these celebrity lyricists and composers and have been a part of. And it was for writing musicals. And she was a writer. This was well established, but she had never written a musical. And yet she was like, here I'm applying. And should I like jump ahead in the story and say that you got it?
Sure.
You
Yeah.
did. And it's been awesome to witness. But that was a big moment of just like trusting that you knew some of what you needed and probably knew a bunch of things that the other applicants did not as a result. But then there was a other stuff that maybe like on the surface looked like the important qualification that you hadn't had experience with directly. So how did you find your way in just trusting your gifts and your ability to learn and grow, to use Joanne's word, throughout that transition?
Yeah, it's so funny because I remember when I told you that I got in and we were on a run and you just like dead stopped in the middle of Prospect Park and you were just like, "Oh my God, this is amazing.
I think I started
There's
to cry in the middle of the run.
which is just so amazing and such a, yeah, I mean, 3 or 4 years later, such a memorable moment to be able to share those things with you. But I think looking back, that it was a really interesting process because, like you, Joanne, I'm like, I always wanted it to do something new, to either learn a new skill, to be in a new environment. And when I got laid off at this point 9 years ago, I was like, I do not want to work at another magazine. I'm going to be a freelance writer and editor. And so that allowed me to sort of dip in and out of a bunch of different genres. I wrote about running and travel and food and culture, and just it sort of like allowed me to allowed me to sort of crack open the writing world a little bit, which then I think served me well because the musical stuff was so funny. I wonder if I have it here actually. I wrote on the front of a notebook lyrics, and it was like, this is where I'm going to write lyrics. Meanwhile, I don't know how to play an instrument. Like, I don't know how to sort of construct a song. I know that, I like music. I do not have a vast musical theater knowledge whatsoever. But I was like, here's my notebook for my lyrics. And then I didn't really know why, but I just kind of would jot down some stuff in there. And then it looks really nice on paper to say, like, I applied for this workshop and then I got in, and then it sort of led me off on a new thing. But like, I had that notebook. That was an important step. I started reading books about composers and lyricists. That was an important step. And then I signed up for a class, a big fan of classes, by a lyricist composer. And it was just basically how to write songs. And I took, a 10-week class and learned like the basic building blocks. And so I did have something to submit to the workshop. It was just lyrics. There was no music. I still didn't know how to write to music. Actually, the assignment for the class where you had to write to music, my song was horrible, but I did it. And so I feel like those were important stepping stones. And then also, your note about the networking, I think, is really important because it can kind of show you other possibilities that are out there. And so I had a coffee meeting with a woman who had actually emailed me from one of my freelance writing opportunities. She's like, oh, I also work at Audible. Do you want to get coffee? So, we were chatting, and then she's like, oh, actually, I write musicals. And I was like, oh, how do you do that? Like, do you write the music, or, how does one write a musical? And then she told me about this program, which I never would have heard about. And I just filed it away. And then 2 years later, applied and got in. And so every time I see her in class, I'm just like, Jessica, you changed my life. But, if I hadn't taken that meeting, if I hadn't sort of wanted to talk with someone whose experience has sort of been a little different than mine, I just sort of think about, where it all could have shifted. And yeah, and so, once you get in and you sort of find, I think, a core group of people or a community, that can go a long way towards helping you with how you identify as a writer, artist, creator, or any sort of job that you're in, because you're surrounded by these people who are also doing the same thing. So I think that was another major shift. And I don't think that it would have happened quite as fast if I had just been, writing in my lyric notebook, which I still have.
And I love this part in the journey too, because it's like in this part in the identity shift, you guys have set the clear intention, you've walked in the door of it, you're living it, right? And like, you have surrounded yourself by other people who are doing it. You've realized, like, I'm going to be a leader or a lyricist. I need to be around leaders and lyricists. And like, a lot of things in your lives have started to really change and move into this new place. And yet I have seen with both of you this moment that I find so fascinating. And I've seen it in myself so many times. And to me, in some ways, it's the most essential part of this transition as it really happens, and probably the longest one, right? Is like all the things we were really good at, right? And that we had been validated for and we felt really successful at, still comes calling, right? And then there was the money piece of it that we talked about a minute ago, but they still come calling. And there's a whole world of people who know us for that. And who, when they think of those gifts, they think of us. They think, you want a badass assistant, you call Joanne. You want a journalist, you call Kara. You can count on them. They're going to do an amazing job because they're really good at it. And they come and they're like, hey, come be great at this. And it's either like the whole job, the whole kit and caboodle, or it's even just like, just do 5 minutes of it. Or you see someone else doing it and you're like, oh, they're not very good at that. I could do that better. I don't have time for them to figure it out. I'm just going to jump in and do it because it's easier. I'm good at it. I know how to do it. That to me is the part that gets us really stuck because it's tantalizing, it's rewarding. And if the more we continue to do that, the less likely we are to ever fully move into what we want to be. So Joanne,
I
do you
feel
want to
like
tell specifically your story?
yeah, I feel like I'm like still kind of, I won't say, I will say that, okay, I'm trying to be very mindful of what I say. So I would say that it it becomes challenging at times to basically say, well, actually, such and such can assist you with that part. I can help you with this area. Like I don't have capacity for, even though I could do it, just like Aranza said, it's like I could just get it done 5 minutes. Like that'll take somebody an hour. Boom, 5 minutes, excellent, perfect. You won't even have to ask me any questions. Like you got it, it's done, right? But I'm like, in order for me to continue down this path, down this new path, right? I have to keep telling the universe, it's kind of like in my dating life, stop calling me ex-boyfriend. I don't want to talk to you no more. Right? So I have to keep just saying, keep deferring, I would say. Maybe that's a good word. So basically, it's interesting. This job that I have, well, every job that I've had, thank God, it has been a referral. It's literally been my job. Like, here you go. I'm calling you, and it's like you have to do the application, but not really. So I was at a major like asset management firm, and my old boss at my first at the job prior at the large financial institution called me and said, hey, this is what I'm building. I'm looking for an amazing, well, I don't know if you know this, Aranzis, but she said, I'm looking for an amazing executive assistant slash office manager. And I said, well, what is actually the work that you want done, right? She's like, well, we are building out an office in New York. The flagship office is in San Francisco. So she starts telling me whatever. And so I said, okay. I was like, I'll think about, who would, she says, I know you're happy where you are and you're doing big things. Actually, tell me what you're doing. So I start to tell her, well, I am transitioning out of the executive assistant role into like, I'm a chief of staff right now, for a COO. And right now I am building out the company's brand new office in Atlanta. It's going to be a 4-story, 500-person office. She said, holy shit, really? I'm like, yeah. She's like, well, we're building an office. You could do it for us, I'm like, oh, okay. Now, keep in mind, she knew me as an executive assistant, right? So that's her mindset. It's like, I know she can do all of these jobs and do it really well. I know she could do the executive assistant, which would be awesome. And then she can help everybody, whoever needs help in the office, right? This whole help, right? Like assist, help, right? Everybody, whatever you need, I can do it. And also do our build out, which is a whole body of work, right?
So
I'm like,
basically,
okay.
she saw all your strengths,
She
right?
saw all my
Yeah.
strengths.
Yeah.
And so, to make a very long story short, I said yes, obviously making sure that, I wasn't in that executive assistant umbrella, I'm an associate in the business, like, et cetera, et cetera. But the mentality is still, she's an excellent EA, right? So when people come to me, when she comes to me, it's often I'm having to shift the verbiage, right? Like what I say, right? So I had to remove, how can I help? How can I assist? Happy to help. All these like buzzwords, administrative, all of these things I had to remove from my vocabulary, which was really hard. And that's kind of where Aransas and I like worked on that a lot,
Yeah,
to
I
kind
think
of,
for you too, it was like, I'm going to remove specific ways of relating to people. I'm going to shift the language and I'm going to start asking myself, like, how would an owner behave? How would an owner answer this question? Who would an owner spend time with? Who would an owner delegate to?
Mhm.
And for what? And I think that, like, it's interesting because Kara's work obviously is so different. And that's
Mhm.
why I love this conversation because it puts us in like two very different spheres to have
Yeah.
a conversation. But you had the same thing with journalism, right?
Yeah, it's funny. It's all the same, like sort of being known for something, having those, especially with people who meet you at the beginning of your career, you are always going to be in that mode to them. And so I've had different little tricks that I've had to use over the years, especially when um, freelancing, because that can sort of balloon into you can't really be a full-time freelance writer in the journalistic sphere and then also have a full slate of creative writing. And so it was slowly like tamping down the freelance stuff and then incorporating more creative writing. And some tricks that I used were basically like if someone came to me, because it sort of became known then as someone who would work on different projects. I would drop in at different, magazines, editorial projects, and then, leave after a couple of months when it was over. And so people started coming to me as, you know, can you work with us on X, Y, and Z? And I started to think, okay, if this is something that I immediately want to refer to someone else, I absolutely should not say yes. And so
Yeah.
that was a great way to
Oh,
judge
that's
my like
good. That is good.
Right? Is that
basic
a good
instinct
filter?
of it, because I love recommending
Ooh.
people for jobs, right? Like I love connecting people to great opportunities. But if it was like, hey, do you want to write this story about um, some TV show, and it's going to take a couple of interviews, and it's due in 2 days, and we'll pay a couple $100s. And like in a different part of my career, I might have been like, absolutely, that sounds so fun. But if I'm just like, okay, should I email this person, what names can I give them? Then I'm like, do not say yes, because you are going to resent that assignment every moment, every step of the way. So that was one filter. And then the
I
other
like the
was,
lucky me filter
hmm,
when I'm like, really? Lucky me?
oh
Or,
yes, when you want it.
oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. You just start to think like, do I want to spend like 2 weeks on this or 2 months on this or whatever? And even if it's a great opportunity, it's like, is it great for you in that moment? And that has shifted so much. I've had periods where I'm like, I want as much work like that as possible. I'm in like a
Mhm.
total revenue generating phase, like let's go, I'll just finish it all. Or I don't want that, and I need sort of the time and space to do other things. And and then so that sort of led me to eventually saying, okay, I want a part-time job where I'm just doing the journalist stuff and editing, and I won't take any other freelance writing. So it's a very bright line, right? Where you just go, I'm not doing that right now. I'm not writing one-off pieces for outlets. I'm not pitching. And it is actually very freeing, instead of having to judge each opportunity as it comes your way, because you will know if something rises to the top. But otherwise, you could just say, I'm not, I'm not doing that type of thing right now because I have this other way of earning an income and a way of sort of satisfying that old identity at the moment. So those were some of the ways that I kind of slowly transition, but it is really hard to say no because you want to be known as someone who's competent and good and who can fulfill all the expectations that they have of you that they've always had from your previous jobs and interactions. And yeah, I have to say, like, it's a really long process to sort of divorce yourself from those early ideas of what you were good at and
Ooh,
what you should be doing.
divorce. Ooh,
It is the divorce,
you
though,
you
right?
you have used some words, Kara. I'm like, oh, I need to write that down. It's
I
so
mean,
good.
he does have some experience writing, so it makes sense. But it is funny because what I was realizing as you were talking, Kara, is that there are moments where we're particularly vulnerable to getting sucked back into the old identities,
Oh
right? So,
yeah.
like moments where we're not feeling validated in the new thing we want to be doing, moments where we feel like, shit, I could make money there. I'm not making any money here. Moments where like we need a little ego boost or we just need the satisfaction of getting something done. And yet you and I have found time and time and time again that that ends up, even though it feels good in the moment to get the little stroke on the ego, it ends up sucking all the life out of the new thing for a period and then
Exactly.
it starts the cycle again. And it's like, I think that for me is sort of the big thing I hope people take from this is like really when you're passing these filters, be really considerate. Because I think the question you asked when you said like, do I want to do this for 2 months? Maybe that's what we should be asking about the things that take 2 days, right? Like in the
Yeah.
same way you go to TJ Maxx and you're like, ooh, this was $185 at retail and it's only 10 here. And so you buy it and you never wear it and you donate it to Goodwill. And I think that happens so often. It's like, oh, it's a bargain. But really, they say the thing you should be asking yourself is if it were $185, would you really want it? So the answer is no,
Hmm.
then don't buy it. And I think the same is true here that we should apply TJ Maxx logic. Like, even if it's only 2 days, would I want to invest 2 months into it? And if the answer is no, then the answer is probably not. This is probably just one of those alluring, suck you back into your old identity moments.
Yeah, I love the TJ Maxx metaphor. And another trick that I've sort of shared with friends and stuff too is that to just write both emails as a response of like, thank you so much for the opportunity. Like, I'm just not doing that right now. Here's 6 people you should reach out to instead. And then the other one that's like, great, let me know like when the deadline is and who I should interview, and just see how each one makes you feel. And
Feel.
usually, if you're at that point where you're writing both, you should just say no. But it will convince you to be like, oh, you are going to resent this every step of the way, and then you won't get paid for 6 weeks, and you'll resent it every step of the way for that. And so it's just, but I think this has to happen. Like literally, it's probably happened 200 times in the last 10 years of understanding that it's the ego boost is not the ego boost is getting asked to do it, but it's not actually doing it. And so
Mm,
once you do it, it's you just don't need the validation from that anymore. If anything, you need the validation from the new identity that you're sort of carving things out. And so if you say like, well, if someone emailed me and said, can you write 3 songs by the end of the week? I'd be like, yes, I want to spend every waking moment doing that, but probably not the other assignment that I can't bring myself to like write the email response back to.
yeah, yeah. I think too, what we're really centering around is this core question of what is it really costing me to say yes to the old identity? And oftentimes, I think usually it's a lot more than it looks like on the surface. It looks like a reward on the surface, but the cost is actually far greater toward what we really want to become. And it just takes so much resilience to keep going in something new. And you and I, Kara, have talked about the phrase betting on ourselves before. And I think these are the little ways that we bet on ourselves and we bet on our dreams, is to say no to things that sound pretty good and pretty exciting. And maybe I'm talking to myself because somebody called me today and talked to me about a really cool job. Um, it's like, it's worth mentioning, right? How tempting it is and how likely it is we will lapse and fall back into those old patterns. And it doesn't mean that we've given up the dream. Because I've watched both of you, I've watched myself over and over again go back to the old. And every time I try, it's like, what is that? It's like the one step backward, two steps forward. I don't know. I've got no good analogy. Somebody else come up with a good one on this. But it's like this idea of like, I may move backward into the old role for a second, but I trust that each time I'm moving a little further into the new. And that maybe the distance between me and the lapses gets a little bit greater each time as I reinforce to myself, that's really not who I am or who I was. And it's like my first career in my life was as an actor. And it was a really easy one to just be like, I'm not going to audition. And nobody called me and said, hey, come be an actor. I just like went into the other job and I kept doing it. And I was really glad to be doing it. And it was less tantalizing because I wasn't making any money. I wasn't getting a whole lot of validation that it was a great thing to be doing. It was pretty easy to leave. But I think it is much harder to leave something that's given us a lot. And again, relationally, career, you name it, it's a lot harder to leave something we love and that has loved us back when we found something else that we love even more. So with that, I'm curious, with just the last couple of minutes, those of you who are listening in, if you had any questions you wanted to ask Kara or Joanne or any other thoughts you wanted to add into this conversation at this point.
I joined a little bit late, but I relate to all of this because I'm currently in a job search and it feels all too familiar. So I hear you, sisters. It's always tempting to take a step back, but I have found in the last few months in my own job search, the more time you give it and the more you can really clarify what it is that you want, the easier it becomes to start saying no to stuff that just doesn't fit the paradigm. And I think women in particular are more prone to settling on the fringes, being like, it doesn't feel perfect, but it feels good enough. And like, I'll make it work. I'll keep reminding them I'm not an EA. I'll keep telling them that I'm the boss. I'll keep reinforcing that. And it takes a lot of courage to do that as well, right? To find yourself in a situation where, it may not be quite perfect, but you can work it and get it there, and invest the time and the energy when you have the confidence to know that both you deserve to be there, and that people will recognize it with time. So it was wonderful hearing your stories and asserting yourselves, digging your heels in, saying no.
That really is it, right? Like, it's just like, it's standing in our strength and in our conviction that we're on the right path. And that's scary and it's hard. And yet, I know with each of you, you have a lot of confidence and clarity that you are doing the right thing. And what you are doing now lights you up and it excites you. And you know you're good at it. And you know you have a contribution to make and things to learn. And it's right. Like, there's so much conviction there. So it's like we if we go all the way back full circle to where these transition journeys begin, it really does start in that conviction and it probably always keeps coming back to that conviction. Like, why is it worth it to say no to the well-paying gig that doesn't actually satisfy us? Because it's not what I want to do. And I've got to trust that there is something more out there. And even if it doesn't pay me more necessarily right away or ever, it's worth doing because I know it's what I'm passionate about. It's where I care. It's where I feel lit up. And that's the bet.
Yeah, I wanted to say that I relate to your job search, Liz, because I feel like that is also a very clarifying place to be, because I was even on, I was having a dark moment last week, and so I was on LinkedIn and just like started to look up job listings, and I'm like, then you can easily recognize like what you don't want. And I feel like that takes a lot of time and energy to get to that place too, because you start looking at things and you go, that reinforces an old identity, or that is I cannot bear to do that, for 8 hours a day. And then that can also give you some conviction to move towards the new thing, because you're getting these examples of like, that's what that actually would feel like and look like. And then you just X out of that tab, and then you start to go try and find something new. But I definitely have been there more recently than you could probably imagine. So yeah, it's a sort of I think Aransas would call it like a not a tipping point, but a juncture of some kind, which is where we've all found ourselves time and time again.
I think, I mean, whether it's interviewing people to be your life partner or interviewing people to be your boss, right? There is value in interviewing, right? There's value in sampling what's out there because it starts to give you a really good idea. Unfortunately, more often than not, what you don't want shows up really loud and clear. But as you start to X out what you don't want, the clarity comes in what you really do want. So, whether it's online dating or LinkedIn trolling of job postings, you got to go see what's available to know what you don't want.
Yeah, say yes to the meeting and then just say no later,
Yeah, I did a similar thing to your write the yes, write the no email. As I have one friend who, as I've been interviewing for jobs, I have to pitch her on the job to convince her that it's the right job for me. She's like, look, you're a really good salesperson, so if you can't convince me that this job is great, like it's not gonna be great. And then she gives me like okay, that's a C-. Like there's no effing way you should take this job because you can't even credibly pitch me on it. Like you're not excited. And it's been a really good gauge of, okay, can I for 5 minutes pitch one of my best friends that this is something I should do with my life.
So good.
I'm stealing that.
Totally. It's going in your next book, Kara, which I just realized I should have totally like reached over and held up your book while you were talking about it.
Oh, wow. Right there. Wow.
Right here, always at my side. I'll send you guys a link to it. It's amazing. We'll have to do it as our book club soon. I think I keep saying this is the most important thing. I'm going to say it one more time. I think this is the most important thing. That we acknowledge that it is alluring and natural to get pulled back to our old identities and to return to what is familiar and known and normal to us, and that we can show ourselves grace when that happens and trust that we are learning every step of the way what works for us, what works against us, how we filter. And the truth is, once we fully move into where we're going to be right now, we're going to be probably ready for the next transition.
Stop it. Too much work. Never ending.
Continuous cycle.
That's facts. That is a fact.
Right? Because that's where it starts to get boring and uninteresting, and we've stopped learning. And so then we're ready for new learning and new growth. So we might as well get good at this stuff. We might as well practice giving ourselves grace along the way. Joanne, Kara, thank you so much for sharing your stories. I love you both so much. And I love getting to be beside you on your journeys and take courage and wisdom from you on the regular. So thank you for for sharing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah,
This was
thank you.
lovely. Nice to meet you, Cara.
Yeah, you as well. This is yeah, it definitely helps to try to articulate these things as we move through them again and again. So thank you
We
for
just bring
always
it to
helping
life,
with that. Yeah,
right?
we need to hear it over and over and over again.
Yep.
Love you all. Gina,
Thank you, lovely ladies.
thank you so much for being here.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.
Take
Have a great
care.
night.